So we'll take a look at what happens when we run this thing. And what you see at first is something at very first glance it looks like something symmetric. But as time goes on, it would appear to be random. Now, if we stop to think about this for a little bit, what we realize, of course, is that, well, wait a minute, we started with a completely blank or white grid, and the automaton only has two rules to follow. It's following those rules, and so, of course, what that really means is that the process is deterministic. But, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can predict what's happening. It's interesting that you can get fairly complex behavior even with something with very, very simple rules. Now, this thing will take a while to run, and one of the questions that comes up when you're first looking at this is, well, is this all there is to it? And perhaps a more mathematical or just a more technical question would be, well, does it continue to get bigger? Does it just continue to enlarge the size of this blob? Or conversely, is there something going on that may potentially restrict it or constrain it to staying within a certain area? But in either case, whether it kind of just stays running around in a certain zone or whether the blob keeps increasing, it doesn't appear that it's going to be doing anything more interesting than that. It's got this blob, and that's about it. Now, if you've never seen this before, what will end up happening is something that is really remarkable, very, very surprising. But it takes about 11,000 iterations before it finally does the thing that's remarkable. So we'll jump ahead here and then see what happens. All right, so we're a bit further ahead in time. The blob is a little bigger, but so far, nothing terribly remarkable has happened. So if we just are a little bit patient, what you will see in a moment is something that you would never have expected to occur. It's doing it now. You may not realize it, but it's actually fallen into a repeating pattern. And what it's doing is creating something that in the literature they refer to as a highway. And it's I think it's a 104-step repeating pattern that always ends up occurring. And again, this is something that you just would never have expected, given the rules, given the initial blob that the thing is creating. It just is rather remarkable that at some point, we might like to say that, well, at some point the ant has finally found its mission in life and it proceeds to create the highway. In reality, of course, it's just following its rules, but this emergent behavior, for some reason, occurs. Now, given the fact that it's a completely blank grid to begin with, then you can say, well, okay, so we got a white grid, follows the two rules, and for some reason that we don't understand, it eventually creates this highway. But it really couldn't have done anything else. Why it ends up this way, you say, well, it really couldn't have done anything else. It's just following its rules. What is remarkable, however, is that if you populate the grid with random black and white squares, then it still creates a highway as long as the random grid pattern is not infinite in extent. If the random grid pattern is finite in extent, then eventually the ant finds its way out and it creates a highway, no matter what. And that is actually what is the truly remarkable thing, is that this highway is not an accident. For some reason, this cellular automaton always creates a highway. Well, we say always. It actually hasn't been proven that it always creates a highway, but coming up on 25 years after the thing was invented, nobody has yet come up with a random grid pattern that prevents it from creating a highway. It always creates a highway. And I'll post some optional videos that show some examples of what happens with when you try to place some roadblocks in the way and the thing ends up still creating the highway. For your homework, you just have to start with the white grid pattern and go ahead and complete the graphics so that it'll produce this result. But if you're interested, you can certainly, after you get this done, you can start throwing down some random black grid squares and then see what happens.